Hey guys, Michael Whitaker here. Today I want to talk about 5 different things that really gives me an amazing mix and gives me a really realistic mock-up. You can have the coolest song and you have great samples and everything, but ultimately if the mix isn't any good, it's going to sound amateurish. So go ahead and smash the like and subscribe button and let's get into it. So first of all, the most important thing is our orchestration. You can't get away from actually knowing how the orchestra works. One thing I hear from composer demos in our academy when they first start, a lot of times they forget that you have a piccolo, flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, contrabassoon, and other woodwinds, and then you have trumpet, you have French horns, trombones, tuba, and maybe some other variations of that. Then you have a violin, viola, cello, bass. All of these people, if you're hiring a real orchestra, are sitting there waiting for you to do something. So put them to use. I hear too many times where people will make a chord and it sounds like they're playing it on their piano. Ultimately, we want to orchestrate and think of orchestration and scoring as we have individual humans sitting there. So that means if you make a chord with the French horns and you have a patch like the Junkie XL patch that has 6 to 12 players on one note, and you make a triad, you're at 18 to 24 players, and that's really unrealistic sounding. And so we have to actually listen to real orchestral recordings so that we know what they actually sound like. So balance between the sections is going to really help your mix. So before you even get to the mix, understanding the way the orchestra works is really critical. Okay, so the next tip I have is to import other mixes into your cues as a reference. And we'll take a look at this in a second, but ultimately, you're going to hear real big discrepancies in your mix compared to a professional mix. Where are the trumpets landing? Where is the bass sitting at? Where's our percussion sitting at? And as we compare, we can make adjustments to our mix. This is a critical process until you feel really comfortable where the orchestra should sound like and where it should sit. All right, so now I have loaded some John Williams tracks up here. Please don't copyright strike me. But what I'm doing is I am going to listen to John Williams and I'm going to listen to my score, and I'm going to listen to variations of where the trumpet is, where where all the different sections are, and we'll get a really good sense of where we need to be. So let's start with a reference of John Williams' score. All right, so that sounds good. Now let's listen. I'm gonna listen to mine. So I have a mute here. I'm just gonna go back and forth. All right, so let's go back to John Williams. And you can just go back and forth. So back to John Williams now. I have another piece loaded in here. I use multiple pieces. You can use multiple scores if you want. Let's listen to John Williams. So clean. You really hear those trumpets amazingly well. Of course, a MIDI mock-up's never going to match a real live orchestra, but we can get close. And so let's check out my... All right, so... So It's pretty close. There's some subtle variations. Mine seems like maybe a little harsh in the high end. I could bring down some of that, but the most important thing is, where is your brass sitting in the mix? Where are they panned? Is mine coming across like that? Where's the low end sitting? You know, all these sorts of things. So that's really key to getting your mix. This listening process, the back and forth, you can't beat this. And I'm going to show you a plugin right now that I use that's so helpful to really put your favorite cues in there and listen. All right, so this plugin here is called MCompare, and I really love it because it allows me to listen to a whole bunch of loaded in files at one time compared to my score. That's going to not only help me with the mix, but it's also a good way to figure out, like, what do I write right here? So if you're lost and you're trying to figure stuff out, load a bunch of cues into here and you'll see what seems to be working, and then you can go in that direction, right? And so let's just take a look right here. I've got a couple cues loaded in. These are my own for copyright purposes, so they don't really match so much, but you can get the idea that if I hit my play button, it's going to play this cue that's loaded right here. And this is just a compilation. But for example, I can switch to another cue here and also play this cue. And you can start it from wherever you want in the cue when you hit play in your, in the movie or the TV show. And obviously this is not working with the picture, but you get the idea. So I can go back to this cue. Oh, I like this. Or maybe I like this. I'm going to look at this cue right here. All right, will that work in my cue right here? And when I hit play, oh, we're past the video here, but yeah, that's the idea. So you go, okay, that's working great. Now I can hear my mix. When I turn this off, we'll go back to my score that's scored to picture. And I can go, okay, I like that. Maybe I need to bring something up. So back to this one. So you can really get a sense of a lot of things. It also has filtering. You can filter out the low end. You can compare a lot of different elements. And there are other programs that do this as well. But this is a great way not only to learn what you need to be scoring, what's going to work in this scene, but really check your mix. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is your mix from front to back. The perception of where your instruments lie inside a room, whether it's left to right or front to back. But the front to back is really important. A lot of times composers will get the left and right, but a lot of times when they're mixing, it will sound like, in a cymbal swell or crash, or somebody takes a lead. If you're sitting in the 20th row listening to this orchestra, it sounds like somebody actually came up and played right in front of you. And so everything we do is from a perspective of front to back. So that means that the things that are up front are the main things, but things that are in the back typically will lose the sense of the high end. So your percussion and, people that are sitting toward the back typically will have a little more ambience, and, depending on the style of score. But we have to be careful of that they don't sound like they're sitting up front, okay? So think about from front to back. Strings tend to be more up front, where your brass and stuff might sit back more in the mix. And this is kind of a subjective thing, but ultimately, you have mic positions on your sample libraries. You should go through your entire template, and on your template, really focus on where in the mic positions are these people sitting. In a real, orchestra, when you go listen to a live orchestra, which I highly recommend, because ultimately, if you don't know what they sound like in real life, listening to a recording is not always the best teacher of that. Listen in real life, go to a live great orchestra and hear how much reverb is in the room, all these sorts of things. But listen to where things sit in the mix from front to back. This is critical. One tool that can really help with this that I use quite a bit is called the Berlin Studio. Basically, this is, instead of reverb, the problem with a lot of reverbs is that you have these long tails. So if you have chords that change rapidly, you get the tail of the previous chord, going out over the next chord, and it starts to sound like mush. Well, what Berlin Studio does is allow us to get the sense of what, it's like to be going through the microphones in the room. In a real hall, typically in a good orchestral hall, the reverbs aren't super long. They're full and thick, but there's not a lot of length to it. So it has to really bloom, but not go for a long time. And this plugin really helps that, especially in things like the brass, where the brass can get really bright. And you have the ability here to select your instrument section. So you see this little stage here. The stage allows us to pick where we want the instrument to sit in the stage, whether left and right. And it kind of is almost like a convolution where it will adjust the microphones to where they are on stage. So let's listen to brass right now. We'll solo the brass. So that sounds pretty good by itself, but with Berlin Studio, we can really sculpt where they're sitting from front to back and even left to right without adding a ton of reverb. All right. All right, let's listen to it without it. We really get the sense of it being up front. And so you have your surround mics, you might pull these down, and you can adjust the decay on all these too. If that's too much for you, pull down the decay and you'll really get kind of that sweet spot of that three-dimensionalness that we're looking for in a mix. Okay, so tip number 4 is you to go through your entire template and analyze not only where they're sitting in the room, like we talked about in tip number 3, but analyze what frequencies are picking, are really popping out, and how is the gain staging between all these sections. A lot of times I hear composers that they write music that's just way too loud, or they'll start writing something that's loud, and they don't have any headroom to go from there. So you can't do any kind of mastering. So gain staging all your cues is really critical. That, the best way to gain stage, in my opinion, is to write a crazy bombastic cue with all of your stuff and then start to adjust the gain. In Cubase, we have the ability to do pre-gain on the channel here, which will allow you to adjust the gain before it hits any of the channel strip, which is amazing. But really, also, even at the channel level, for example, if you were to have a contact instrument up, let me show you here. So each contact instrument has a master out. And this master is, we don't adjust this with MIDI CCs. CC7 will adjust this slider here, but this will allow us to gain stage this whole thing up here. So if you don't have this in contact, we use contact a lot, make sure that your setting, when you play when you hit the keyboard as loud as it can, that it's not going to go in your faders over 0. And matter of fact, I would try and keep everything to about, a -6 to start. You can always get louder, but it's a lot harder to get softer. One thing when I'm analyzing to short and long reverbs and do all that, in my mind, and every composer is different, but I feel like every instrument should be sitting where it should be sitting in the room on that specific track. That means I have to analyze the microphone positions of those tracks to get that sense of where it's sitting in the room. Where the pan is also critical as well, right? So the microphones, the pan, and then in the last case is add more reverb. Adding more reverb equals adding more mush, adding, a lot of times making it less clear, especially when you add that to your entire template. So sending everything through an external reverb, for me, makes it usually sound more mushy. All right, and we just talked about in the last part reverb. One of the most important things for me is that, and I hear the mistakes in composers in our academy, is that they have reverb lengths that are just too long. To be honest with you, I think most of the reverbs sound really good these days. So, even the stock reverbs in most of your, most of your DAWs are going to sound great. I'm not a huge fan of, criticizing every reverb, because ultimately, they didn't have these back in the day and they had great mixes. So adding reverb, if you need it is, we do that, but I don't like broad use of reverb. Also, reverb, especially on your low end instruments, one thing that you can do is make sure that on your reverb on the instruments, on the low end instruments, so low percussion, low brass, these instruments, is that you use a high pass filter. Let me show you. All right, so here I have Valhalla Vintage Verb, which I think is a really good reverb. I have tons of different reverbs, cinematic rooms, lexicons, all these Bricasti, they'll all do a decent job, to be honest with you. But one thing is making sure that your decay time is not too long. So with this brass sound, which is the Caspian bass trombones, if I was to keep this decay long, I hear this a lot. Hear that? And that kind of ambient reverb just really messes up your mix. So be really short with your reverbs, especially on the brass. Start at like 1.4 seconds. I wouldn't be starting at 2.5 second reverbs. I would be starting at shorter reverbs, because you can adjust the room size with the microphone position, but the reverb, the decay, if you even need it, keep it short to start. The next thing is that every reverb just about is going to have a low cut filter or a high pass filter. So with low bass instruments, I can cut a lot of the low end out of there because I don't want the low end traveling into the next chord. That just makes mush. So we don't need that because the low end is built in the sound. The same with a lot of cymbals, for example. The high end, we would use maybe a high cut, a low pass filter to cut the highs, and then a high cut pass filter, how that works in an EQ to cut your lows. It's kind of the opposite thing. All right, so finally, let's take a look at this Star Wars rescore I did and kind of listen to the balance where things are sitting in my mix. let's stop it there. All right, so just listening to that, it seems like the high end is a little bit crispy to me. I still have some adjustments to make. Again, I'll go back to the, some John Williams or, a really good score that's mixed well and do that comparison. All right, that was really fun to do, and I hope you got something out of this video. Mixing is tough, but practice, practice, practice. You will get better. If you want to study film scoring with me, I run a 5-month intensive at scorecraftacademy.com. You're not going to find any other program like it. It is a very intensive 5 months of just scoring major Hollywood pictures, video games, trailers. Every single week for 5 months, it will take your game to another level, including mixing and sound design. So I would love to talk with you. Book a call with me if you want to move forward in that direction, learning the scoring side and the business side of, music for film and television. I hope to see you in the next video, and have a great one.